Welcome to another edition of the Hockey Royalty Podcast. I am Joe Paterino, kicking this one off tonight here with my man Russell Morgan. Randon, he'll be here. He'll be joining us a little bit later. So in the meantime, you get the luxury of Joe and Russ to start things off. So Russell, I'm going to kick it over to you. How are things here on this? What do we got? A Monday evening? We're watching the Rangers Devils Game 7, second intermission. How's things going over there?
Oh man, I mean, besides the bleak outlook of our favorite hockey team here, hockey's been great. I can't complain. I mean, yesterday was probably one of the more exciting, epic pair of Game 7s that I can remember in terms of a day and surprises. So can't complain. It's been pretty fun. How about you?
I mean, is there anything better? And I heard someone compare it to, and I'm not a big basketball guy, but somebody said, the first round of the NHL playoffs is like their March Madness, like that opening weekend of March Madness. I mean, this is chaos.
Yeah.
I love the first round of playoffs. And boy, is there a bigger, just shockwave sent through the NHL than the Boston Bruins being upset big time by Florida. And in the same night, the defending Cup champs go down to Seattle, who no one had Seattle, virtually no one had Seattle beating Colorado. So what a night in terms of hockey. If you're a neutral, that's for sure. I mean, there's no shortage of excitement. And then here we see the Devils as we start the third period. They're up 2-0 on the Rangers, a Rangers team who, last year was kind of that up and coming, knocked off Pittsburgh, made a little bit of a run. So a lot of people had them pegged for this year. And at least so far, they're in some trouble here tonight.
Isn't it wild? I mean, like, let alone like the Bruins outlook. Because I mean, for the Bruins, just to kind of talk about them real quick, is we had talked about it a little bit. Like I had told you, like I felt like the Panthers would give them a bigger run for their money than a lot of people would give them credit for. Because I mean, this Panthers team, yeah, they kind of reshaped the roster with Huberdeau gone and Rieger gone and Tkachuk coming in. Dude, I mean, Tkachuk, like as much as Kings fans want to hate him, and I guess maybe we hate him a little bit less because he's all the way in Florida now, so which is nice. But dude, he's got to be like one of the top 3 players in the NHL, and he's totally playing it, at least in the playoffs, right?
Yeah, he's elevated his game for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, to go along with that, like I told you, like I'm a huge Sasha Barkov fan.
Yeah,
I mean, you grow up watching Andrzej Kopitar, and I see almost like him in itself in Barkov. So to have those 2 players together, I mean, that's a fun team to follow. And I guess they might be like my East team. I don't know if I give them a lot of hope against the Maple Leafs. It feels like the Maple Leafs kind of exercise some demons, and they might come out flying in the second round.
They did.
And those are pretty. I guess the way that the Panthers won it, though, that was pretty surprising. But yeah, and then the Seahawks. I mean, not the Seahawks. I'm sorry, the Kraken. Yeah, isn't that to get your first series win against the Stanley Cup champion? That's pretty epic in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, just touching on Florida real quick before we get into some things here is, it's weird. I loved the Florida team last year. I felt like they had an identity. They were that high-flying rush team, extremely exciting team. And I acknowledge that obviously Matthew Tkachuk they got better personnel. Like he's a great player. I didn't feel like they had I just didn't know who they were under Paul Maurice for so long that I wasn't like a big buyer into the changes they made when they had a clear identity under Brunette. They had this roster that was set where I feel like if they made some tweaks, they could have been in business, but they canned Brunette after, a rough playoff, which, I mean, I thought it was a bit of some in haste the way they did those moves, but regardless, it's worked out for them. They're doing all right. They're on to the second round. Like you said, I have the Leafs are here. I have put my futures bet in on the Leafs on that series already. So for whatever that's worth, I'm sure that will go up in flames. I see some people already in the chat here. Jay Rowe with who's starting keeper next year. Boy, that's $1 million question, isn't it, Russ? Is it October yet from Nav 21? No, it is not. Hello, Topanga. How are you? Angel Sandoval, how are we doing? Good to see you. So keep the chat going, boys. It's awesome to see, boys and girls. That is, it's fun to
Angel wants to
see.
talk about the Kings. Maybe we should dive into
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Hey, we'll get there, Angel. Don't you worry. And we will talk about the Kings. And in honor of Gordon Lightfoot passing away, as that news came down within the last hour, it was sundown on Los Angeles. In Game 6, they fall to the Edmonton Oilers. Back and forth game, crazy game, Russ. I guess we talked about on the show. How we think the Kings needed to play in Game 6. Personally, I thought they did a pretty good job. But what do you think? How was your feelings on Game 6 as the game went along?
Yeah, I mean, you got to give credit to the Kings because it really felt like they really laid it all out there. I mean, as from everything that we've seen, that some of the other games in the series. I mean, you kind of look up at the end of the first period, and they had like 15 plus shots. I mean, you think about other games. I can think it was like Game 2 or Game 5 or whatever. They had like 2 shots in the first period. So I mean, this was a Kings team. They came out flying, and I kind of expected them to, especially with some of the lineup changes they made, which I actually kind of liked. I mean, Arvidsson on the first line with Kopitar and Kempe, it was something that we had never seen before since Arvidsson had come over. They had like 55 seconds together in their entirety in the last 2 years. But I mean, those three looked really good. And I mean, I might be looking too far ahead here, but that's a line I could see coming at the start of next year. But the game, I mean, yeah, it was might have been one of the more entertaining games of the series, which I don't know how you could top that with how many entertaining games there really were. It's just it's tough because you look at it, once again the power play was just the problem. I mean, the Kings couldn't stop the Oilers' power play. I mean, they had 2 power play goals themselves, but if you're giving up power play goals like they had all series, you're not going to win, like McClellan kept saying. I mean, so yeah, that was an issue once again. And then it's tough because you think about like a lot of the keys to winning this series, and one of the major keys with a lot of people talked about was shutting down McDavid and Draisaitl, and especially with how well Draisaitl played all series. I mean, he was a total animal, like probably the best player in the NHL in terms of the playoffs so far. And they did a decent job. I mean, I think the first goal was pretty much from those two. But after that, I thought they did a pretty good job shutting them down throughout the whole game. It just stinks because you get beat by the depth of the Oilers, which was supposed to be a strength of the Kings coming to the series. I mean, we had talked about the third line, like was going to be the wild card, especially if you're going to have the nice line have to shut down Draisaitl, McDavid, which we saw. We had seen McClellan kind of ship Kopitar out against them, but now he switched it up to Danault, Iafallo, and Moore, which I thought played pretty well. But that third line, man, I mean, they just got destroyed. And when you lose to players like Klim Kostin and Kyler Yamamoto, I mean, hats off to the Oilers. It is what it is at that point.
Yeah, I echo your thoughts. I listen. I didn't want to see a Kings team play to keep this game, to not lose it, or to try to win a 1-0 game, because you were just asking for trouble. And they did that all series, and they were nowhere near the series, frankly. But they came out and played. They played very well. I thought they controlled the play for most of the game at 5-on-5. Frankly, I thought it was really good. But to your point, boy, if you're going to do a job on the top 6, you have to do a job on the bottom 6. And I think the problem is it's a tall ask, right? I mean, people think, well, Byfield's a center, Velarde was a center, no problem. They can just play center. They haven't played center all season. So now you're asking Velarde, who now, first of all, I want to back up a second. I think McClellan was in a really tough spot here because he didn't have many other options. Yes, he could have put Blake Lizotte there on the third line, but the fourth line was getting absolutely caved in all series. So he kind of had to get some balance there. So I can't fault him for the decision about what he did with the line. I thought the lineup was as good as he could have put out there.
But that Janmark injury was almost beneficial to the Oilers, right?
I know, because it for whatever reason they went 12-6 to start the series, and yeah, I mean they were better off without. You can't, but they were just caved in that bottom 6, and it's a big problem. But going back to the centers in the third line, you've got Velarde, who's having a breakout season. He did it on the wing. He had issues in part. He was unhealthy for years, but he struggled as a centerman, drive and play. Quentin Byfield is clearly not ready to play as a centerman in the NHL. And then you're asking them to do that, ask Byfield to do that. Oh, you're doing it in game 6 against Edmonton. We're down 3-2 in the series. I mean, it's a tall task because he's obviously not quite there yet. So it was always going to be a struggle. And I know that goes back to something that you talked about, deadline, really not addressing kind of a depth center role there, which probably would have helped. But overall, at least when I talk about game 6, I thought they did what they had to do. They were assertive. They played on the front foot. I thought they needed to limit the power plays. Edmonton had 2 power plays. They did score on the one. McDavid was going to always get his. Mm-hmm. So it was a good game. Unfortunately, they just came out on the wrong end of it. Now, I don't know what your thoughts are, because I know there's let me ask your thoughts on Korpisalo, okay? Yeah. So he had an incredible start to the series after 3 games. And then a little less so the last 3 games. Not to say that he was at fault or he was to blame by any means, but he clearly was not playing to the same caliber, same level he was at the start of the series. What are your thoughts on how he played game 6 and maybe how the series ended for him?
Yeah, it's tough because, I mean, you don't want to be too hard on Korpisalo because if it weren't for him, the Kings could have got swept at the first couple games. But yeah, so those last couple games that he really started to falter. I mean, it's tough because you wonder if he was maybe overworked. You kind of, in hindsight, you maybe wonder if maybe you go to Copley in certain situations, maybe a little earlier. But it's weird because, I mean, you even look around to other. Dude, this Rangers game is crazy right now. I don't know if you guys are watching, but someone's just laying on the ice. Sorry, I mean, getting off
Meyer,
topic
which
here.
Isn't good for my Timo Meyer anytime goal scorer today as he's laying on the ice.
Yeah, he looks like he got Scott Stevens, Paul Correa right there. That was pretty crazy. But yeah, so just to kind of go back to the Kings, it's tough because you look across the league. I mean, the Bruins, even themselves, like I saw Pete Blackburn's post today, talking about how they had done so well going back and forth with goalies all season. And for some reason, they just stuck with Swayman. Or is it Ullmark? They stuck with Swayman,
They stuck
right?
with Ullmark. And he was hurt, by the way, Ullmark, too. No less. Really
so they stuck with Ullmark, and then come to find out he's hurt. Mm-hmm. And then they go to the Swayman in game 7. It seemed like, even though he played really well, but that seemed like such a strange move. So, So all these other teams that had gone back and forth with goalies, the coaches just felt like they just needed to stick with one goalie in the playoffs. And it's weird because, like, how many times did we talk about this leading into the playoffs? Like, wonder what McLellan's going to do. And everybody thought, like, he has to ride one goalie. You have to. And I don't want to say that was a bad move to ride with Korpisalo because, it's hard to, like, we're looking back on it after the series is already over, but you wonder, like, maybe things would have been different and maybe Copley got a little bit more work, or maybe got a game, even game 6. So I don't know. It's tough because in hindsight, Korpisalo did struggle a little bit in the end there. I guess it just more opens up our eyes to. I mean, I've seen so many Kings fans. We'll talk about the offseason more later on too. I've seen so many Kings fans say, trade for a goalie. Like, even the 32 Thoughts I saw you talk about with Jeff Merrick and Elliot Friedman talking about today, how the Kings could be in prime position to trade for a goalie. And I'm like, man, like, I do not want to be in the situation with Cal Peterson again. Like, I just don't want to be there. Like, yeah, you could talk about Connor Hellebuyck is obviously a much better goalie. UC Saros is obviously a much better goalie. But if you get stuck with a goalie on a high cap hit for long term, man, you're handcuffed. And that's kind of the position the Kings are in right now.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about at least the way they didn't talk about it specifically, Connor Hellebuyck, but they did allude to it just because if he was somebody that was in prior discussion, they being 32 Thoughts, Jeff Merrick and Elliot Friedman. Listen, if you heard Hellebuyck's comments in his end of season interview or in end of season presser, you should be calling Winnipeg if you're a team looking for a goalie, because there's a possibility that things could get shaken up there. The thing with Hellebuyck, though, at least if the Kings were to go down that road, it's not a long-term situation. It's a shorter-term deal. I think he's got 1 year after this, so it's at least something where they don't have to commit to it.
1 year is $6.6 million.
Mm-hmm. And if you're trading big assets for it, then you're going to probably look to commit to it. But obviously, when there's few goalies that you would probably be willing to pay for. A guy that's a Vezina candidate virtually every year is probably one of those guys. So I'd be curious to see what happens there. So yeah, I don't blame Korpisalo. To me, he is in that caliber of goaltender that fits into the hashtag goalies for me.
There you go.
Like he is capable of. You said it, Russ. Edmonton could have been up 3-0 after those first 3 games easily. They were significantly better than the Los Angeles Kings, but they were not better than Jonas Korpisalo. He was huge in those 3 games. Could Copley have done that? I don't know. Maybe not. But then you look and he not again. This isn't to say Korpisalo was bad, but it was just he was okay. He's like any other goalie now. He did it. Phoenix Copley could have easily done what Korpisalo did in games 4, 5, 6.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this is why I get into these really difficult things with goalies. It's just like you got to really be careful, And everybody wanted to sign Korpisalo, just give him the back up the truck for him after the first 3 games, and it's like pump the brakes because A, the series isn't over, but B, there's not a long track record here. So what are you paying? So I don't know. It is tough. I think it's going to be an interesting spot that Rob Blake, and we'll talk about the exit interviews as well. We'll also touch on some of the comments that Rob Blake and Todd McClellan and the like had. So another player I want to talk about, Russ, is somebody that came over in the trade with Jonas Korpisalo, our good friend, my good friend, Vladislav Gavrikov.
Your best friend, your best buddy.
Somebody who I was admittedly highly critical of when they acquired him. I won't put those words in your mouth, but I don't think you were necessarily a huge fan per se.
No. But I was almost on the same kind of boat you were on.
So we've seen him for, was it 20 some odd regular season games, 6 playoff games, unrestricted free agent. Before we get into and again, we may do this at a later date anyways, about offseason and signing him and all that stuff. How would you look at Vladislav Gavrikov? We kind of talked about it at the regular season, but how was this series for you for Gavrikov?
Yeah, he's definitely surprising. I mean, it's like fun. It's funny. I think about that meme that's like, my apologies, I wasn't familiar with your game kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I felt the whole series, right? He played a lot better than we had expected him to, especially in his own zone. We kind of knew that he was really good at denying entries with his stick and all that fun stuff. But his defensive game in his own zone was great. I mean, we were talking about even before Game 6 how we wanted to see that matchup against Draisaitl and McDavid. And that was part of the reason why McDavid was kind of maybe slowed down. I mean, I think he had 10 points on the series, which is, I guess, pretty par for the course for McDavid's sense. But he didn't go crazy like he did last year. So I don't know. I will say he earned himself some money this summer.
Yeah.
And whether that comes from the Kings, where once again, kind of going back to the 32 Thoughts podcast, they talked about this too. Apparently that the Kings offered him somewhere under $5 million. This is all speculation, of course. Offered him under $5 million, and Gavrikov denied it. So I don't know if maybe that's going to be something around the line is what he might garner in the offseason at free agency. So do I want the Kings to kind of go for that? I don't know. I'd have to look into it a little bit more, but it's just weird because you look at that. We talked about that pairing too. It's like, yeah, they were doing really good defensively, but it's just like, there's not really that much dynamic to their game. There's no real explosiveness, I guess is a word you could use. They're just really steady. I mean, Matt Roy obviously was steady Eddie, and Gavrikov is almost kind of the same. So it's tough because, yeah, that's going to be a really good shutdown pairing you can have, but then you're losing a little bit of offensive playmaking that maybe you'd want on a top 4 pairing. And that's why we'll probably talk about it. This being, I mean, goalie is obviously going to be probably the number one situation to look at for the Kings, but I'm still looking at that left D position to be I'm looking somebody like an impact type player to be looking for LA to help with maybe that playmaking that's missing, even though we're going to be seeing probably a Jordan Spence or Brian Clark in the lineup. But yeah, I think that's a spot that once again, it's going to be something that Rob Blake might have to look into.
Yeah, shout out to Drew Stahl here with a comment. As much as I would love to see Gavrikov return, I would also love to see Spence and Clark get some time. Might be better to let Gavrikov go and spend big on a goalie. He mentions Hellebuck or Saros. Anybody that's in the chat, really appreciate it. And if you haven't done so, smash the like button, hit subscribe. Really appreciate your
Thanks, guys.
support. On Gavrikov, because let's be honest, I was as critical as anybody. I was wrong. He thoroughly impressed me in the playoffs. I had my doubts even after the regular season. I was like, I'm still nervous about top competition, yada, yada. He played great. He played really, really well in the playoffs, again, for what you expect of him, right? I don't think the Kings could have asked for anything else. So now, in terms of a contract, listen, I think he's a $30 million player. I think somebody's paying him $30 million, whether that's 6x5, 5x6. I don't know. I think he could get upwards of like a 6x6 type of deal. It wouldn't shock me if that's the case. Maybe that's
that would shock me. That would shock me.
I mean, the buzz around him and how well he played this series, I think could have potentially really risen his stock. Maybe a 6x6 is a little high, but maybe a 6x5 isn't so high, or a 5x5, 5.5. I think he's going to push $30 million. And I think with a lot of guys, he's going to be 28 years old. He's a defenseman that is obviously much more known for his defensive side of the game, and is not necessarily known for his skating or his puck moving abilities. And you figure a deal that's going to be 5 to 6 years is going to bring him into his age 33 ish. I don't know. It's a very tricky one. But I will say, just in recapping his playoff, I thought he was really good. So I fully will take the L on, and then I didn't think it was a great acquisition. In that, I think that he even with his skill set, he impressed me more than I thought he would. I still think the Kings needed a player that was more dynamic, that was more able to move pucks, better mobility, because I think that's how I think you're seeing it in times when you look at some of these modern day teams and the way they play. You have defensemen that can skate. You have defensemen that can move pucks. You have to be able to do that. You can't just chip it out and then retreat. And they did a little bit of too much of that. Look at this Devils team. They're a very fast, very rush oriented team. They got really good puck movers on the back end. They all can skate pretty well. It's kind of the way that you're seeing this game go. So I am not opposed to bringing Gavrikov back. What would give me some pause is you've got a lot of defensive defensemen that aren't great with the puck. When you got Mike Anderson, Gavrikov, Roy, and it's like, okay, at some point you got to be able to distribute pucks. So we'll see. Like I said, decent discussion, but very happy with his postseason.
Yeah, I thought that trade just in general was really good. I mean, you kind of look back. I mean, I thought Blake did a good job with that move at the deadline. I mean, it's weird because we talked about this at the deadline. It would be hard to kind of evaluate how the Kings did at the deadline until after the season. So we're at that point.
Yeah.
And for me, like if you would have brought in Gavrikov and say another left-handed defenseman who maybe brings a explosive capability, like I don't know if maybe I'll say the C word again. I don't know if they were still in on Chychrun or not, but I mean, could you imagine those three on the left side with Mikey Anderson, Gavrikov, and Chychrun, or even anybody else? Because at that point, the third pairing for the Kings was non-existent. You couldn't rely on them at all, and especially with the way that Edmonton was deploying McDavid or Draisaitl on the fourth line against the third pair or against the fourth line. Like I mentioned, that move that Woodcroft made, it killed the Kings. I mean, that lack of depth on defense and that lack of depth on the forward position, it hampered them. And even with Blake Lizotte, who probably was still pretty injured or maybe not 100% in the game 6, he only played like 4 or 5 minutes, I believe. So it's tough because we saw that come to fruition again in game 6, and it hurt the Kings. And so you wonder, like looking back on it, and I believe Andrew Noel even asked the question to Blake, like, why was Jonathan Quick included in this trade? And it was pretty much like Blake would not give an answer about
He
it.
asked it kind of twice.
He asked it twice, and I'm glad he did, because Noel and I we talked about this a couple times. Like, why did you include Quick in this deal if it wasn't to open up more money for more moves? Especially when you said that at the press conference after the deal, like, oh, we're going to be looking at more additions and keep our eyes open. So I was like, yes, you do need more forwards. You do need veteran experience on the forward position, or even just another left-handed defenseman. Because as much as I love Sean Durzi and maybe even was appreciative of what Sean Walker did this season, because I mean, it's hard to come back from a year and play the game as well as he did, kind of opening up a little bit. They just couldn't help the Kings in the playoffs this year, and it was really tough to see that be an issue for the Kings when depth was so good for LA the entire season. But I want to ask you about another player, and I know you were appreciative of my glowing
Before you
review.
do, real quick, I'm sorry, but the pessimist, which I am not. Okay, Russ, I'm not a pessimistic guy.
You're always an optimist.
I try to be. The pessimist could say they went out, they traded franchise legend, first round pick. They get Korpisalo, who was overall very good. Okay.
Yeah.
Not great per se in the last 3 games in playoffs, but certainly not his fault. They get Gavrikov, who was, for his abilities, really good. Clearly not enough to get them over the Edmonton hump, though. So was it enough? Like, was it a good deal? Did it? Because they added 2 guys that made them marginally better, which is exactly what you and I we had talked about. Like, they're better depth-wise. Are they impactful better? Are they better enough? And that was the question that we didn't have an answer to. And now, despite them playing well, they're not better enough because they're not. And goalies separate for Gavrikov. Like, he's not that guy to like truly impact the game at both ends of the ice per se. So I don't know. Again, I'm admitting that I'll take the L on the trade, I guess, but still, I don't know. I can see where we're coming from there, Russ.
I just wonder, like we had talked about a couple times too, like I wonder how the Kings defense would have been if they had left Durzi and Roy together and paired Gavrikov with Walker.
Yes.
Because then you wouldn't have had that issue with the depth on the defensive end. You could have deployed any position or any pairing, and you probably would have been fine. But
it might have got a little more.
It is what it is.
Yep.
It is what it is, right? But I want to talk about another player that I thought was an absolute monster for the Kings, and that's Adrian Kempe. I mean, dude, this guy is turning into a total player. He's not just a sniper anymore. I mean, this playoff series kind of opened my eyes. I saw him make defensive plays. I saw him create his own offensive chances. Like it was weird because I don't know if you guys know it, but I talk about it all the time. But I sit next to Andrew Knoll in the press box. So for me as a fan, it's so hard for me to keep in my emotions. And it was funny because even after I think it was game 3 in the overtime, I turned to him. I was like, dude, you're going to have to hold me down if the Kings score because I'm going to go crazy here. But so I tell him, like, dude, like Adrian Kempe, like we talk about it. Like he's just all the moves and plays he was making just on his own. Like it made me really appreciate the player that Adrian Kempe is kind of becoming, because we've always thought about him as like, even just going back to last year, like he was just a pure sniper. Just gonna, maybe last year was just maybe a one-off. We'll see what happens this year. And sure enough, puts up 41 goals and then just comes into this playoff series and was a total animal. Like you felt so comfortable when you saw number 9 on the ice as a Kings fan, because you knew probably something good was going to happen. And that contract is just looking better and better with each passing or with each year so far. I guess even just it's the first year, but I mean, it's going to bring so much value to have a 40-goal scorer at the cap hit that he's at.
I mean, my favorite thing about Kempe right now is that it took him a few years to kind of figure out and find his way. Who am I as a player? What am I as a player? And credit Randon McMahon, who said he just wanted to see Kempe. He was always a Kempe believer, and he was like, you just get him consistent minutes with a top center, obviously Andre Kopitar. He did it, and he turned into a 35-goal scorer, which turned into a 40-plus goal scorer this past year. But he's really, like you said, he's elevated his game, but he knows who he is now. He's going to go north-south. He can win battles. He can beat you off the rush. His shot is elite, dare I say. I mean, he is just turned into a true threat with the puck on his stick in the offensive zone, and he can score almost from any position, almost from any circle, or from any spot in the offensive zone. He's become a lethal goal scoring threat, something that the Kings haven't had in a long time, really.
Yeah, exactly.
So couldn't be happier with his development. And yeah, kind of talking about the series, I felt like he went totally under the radar, not nearly talked about enough for a guy as productive as he was in this postseason. And listen, I get it. The Kings were second best. They didn't win the series, so so be it. But yeah, he deserves a big time shout out because he was excellent all series. And hey, like you said, the contract is looking really good right now for on Kempe.
Yeah, it's weird because you kind of look back at the series, and I remember even last year, like the first couple games, like Kempe was kind of a little quiet and didn't really start producing till later on in the year. But then even just looking at this series, you always hear like the storylines come into play of like, oh, did this player like really make an impact, or did this player? And I look at the top six for the Kings, and like almost every player like played pretty well. Like I follow was a beast. Dano like did his job as much as he could. I mean, defending Draisaitl and McDavid, and even Trevor Moore. Like I thought, had a pretty good series.
Mhm.
Kopitar, obviously. So even Velarde and Fiala when they came back from injury, like even they were good. It's just I think the message here that McClellan talked about, and we might as well just dive into the exit
Yeah.
interviews now in itself. When we listened to McClellan talk at the exit interview, it seemed like the overwhelming sentiment, and even Rob Blake too, was that some of these younger players need to take the next step. And he mentioned players like Byfield needs to start scoring, Arthur Kaliev maybe, even some of these other young players like Anderson Dolan, Rasmus Kupari. Those are the type of players that we're going to be looking for that need to be, I don't know, need to be more productive when the next season rolls around.
Yeah, and just real quick on with some of the in relation to that, Richard Sarabia comes in and says that same patience that was there with Kempe is needed for some of these other kids. Patience paid off with juice, says Jack Fries. Excuse me. So perhaps with some of these younger players, that is an example, and you could look at Velarde as that as well. Somebody who's missed a lot of time with injury and illness and whatnot,
Yeah.
and finally he's had this breakout season. So. Yeah, I mean, I think that was something that was because, well, they kind of have to, Russ. There's a salary cap that we got to deal with. So they don't
Exactly.
really have the luxury to go out and add a Kevin Fiala or anything like that. There's a salary cap. So they need these guys to take next steps. They need Quentin Byfield, which I think it was McClellan. I'll do a quick check of my notes here, but I'm pretty sure it was McClellan was asked about him, center wing. He just says he's a forward, which I thought was a good
That was a typical
comment.
answer.
Yeah, he's a forward. So listen, and Rob Blake did say that they probably still envision him as a center long term, but he right now he's a winger, and I think that's okay. I look at this as we look into next season. If I'm Quentin Byfield, there is a hole right now at 3C. Go take that,
Yep.
right? Like obviously Kopitar, Dano, and Lizotte, as much as we love him, I think is still best suited as a fourth line centerman. That third line center is still wide open. If you want it, go take it, grab it, and go take it. And really, I'm sure Rasmus Kupari wants to do the same thing. But man, Quentin Byfield, if he wants to be a center, it is there for the taking in terms of that third line center role. Real quick, Carter scores. I have to do this. Devils are going to advance. I know Joe is happy. Yes, Carter scores. You know me all too well. But I guess to Byfield here quickly, how did you think his postseason went? I think there's going to be a lot talked about these last two games, which is, I don't know, maybe a little unfair because I thought the first four games were, I guess it's relative to expectation. What is the expectation? I mean, is the expectation for a 20-year-old young player and is really his first playoff, or is the expectation of, hey, buddy, you're a first-line winger, you got to produce like one? What were your thoughts on Byfield?
It's tough because going into that series, he had played, I guess, relatively well to expectation on the first line, right? We've probably seen some of the best hockey from Byfield when playing with Kopitar and Kempe. But yeah, you play against the Oilers in the postseason, it's a totally different beast, and that's kind of what we saw. So I don't want to say he was set up for failure, but it almost felt like it because he's not at this point of his career to be defending Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl on a postseason series. So that's why I would have loved to see Iafallo and Byfield make that switch a little earlier. Maybe we wouldn't have seen Byfield make some of those mistakes that as he did, but he's still young. I mean, he's still a really young player. I mean, going into next year, you do want to see that production start to come. And I've said it a couple of times, and maybe I need to stop saying it. Like I've said that this is really Byfield's first full season when he didn't really have a full season. He played like 50 plus games or so, which I guess is the majority of the season. But even then, he didn't start off with the team, or he did, and then he kind of got hurt. Blah blah blah. The illness. He even mentioned at the exit
25
interviews,
pounds, Russ.
he lost 25 pounds. He had a fever for a full month. So, I mean, especially for Byfield, who came in, I believe, at camp at 225 pounds, that's a lot of weight to lose for an NHL player and then have to regain that strength back during the season. So you can kind of makes a lot of sense at why he was in the AHL for as long as he was. So I don't know. It's tough because he's a 20-year-old, but you have that second overall distinction always tagged to him at this point. So you do want to see him come into training camp, have confidence, because that's another thing he mentioned himself is that he maybe had a little bit more confidence than he had in past seasons. So want to see that confidence start to blossom into maybe some more aggression, more production, and then have that confidence take you and grasp that third line position. Because like I mentioned, I like that first line configuration of Kopitar, Arvidsson, and Kempe. You keep Iafallo with Deneau and Moore. And then if you can have Velarde with Fiala and Byfield, I mean, he's going to be due for production at that point. And then obviously this is all, we're way ahead of ourselves. But yeah. I mean, you kind of look at the salary cap situation. I don't expect the forward unit to change as much as it probably will. I mean, we'll probably see a lot of the same forwards come back because besides Velarde, they're all signed next year. So maybe the fourth line is only the real spot that we could probably see some changes made.
There is. It's just I don't know how you add a defenseman and or a goalie without moving money out, and that money comes at the $4 million range of Iafallo, Arvidsson. Maybe there's another way to do it, but I guess we'll see. You know, I thought a couple of players stuck out to me as just, man, I love watching some of these interviews. I mean, some guys you can tell are just more comfortable in the setting. Sean Durzee's fantastic in those. Sean Walker, I'm going to give him a shout out here because you know what? He was much maligned all season. I think we at times may have been there with them, but overall, I really thought we tried to say, guys, this is not a bad player here. Like he's a useful NHL player, depending on the role and stuff. Like he can play. And, you know, the way he talked about coming back from what he came back from, and really, I thought he wasn't a bad option by the end of the season. He earned playing those last two games, and I thought he was better than what was out there before in the last two games. He did make the comment, Russ, about how he said that he was not 100% solid on where he stands right now. He gets it, right? He's honest. He gets it. I don't know. I just really appreciated. He seemed you know, just honest in that interview and kind of forthcoming, which it was a difficult, challenging year coming off the injury. And I think for him personally, I was happy to see that he got to where he got to.
Yeah, he was definitely probably the most honest out of all the, I mean, besides Doughty, who's always going to be honest with the media. But yeah, that really opened my eyes. I mean, him talking about knowing what's coming. I mean, obviously we all talk about Brant Clark, Jordan Spence, all these young defensive players on the right side, the same position that Sean Walker plays. And yeah, he sees the writing on the wall. And he even said himself, like, the organization has got to do what the organization's got to do. So I don't know. It felt like in that moment, from hearing from him in that room and then hearing from Rob Blake, it almost felt like they've already had this conversation. Like, hey, man, like it is what it is. Like your salary cap, I think his cap is like 2.5 or even less than that. So, I mean, if you could, I mean, the thing with Walker is like, you're not going to have to buy him out. You're not going to have to put him on waivers. You can probably even find a trade partner for him because, yeah, he's still a really quality NHL defenseman. I mean, he's not going to be a top 4 defenseman who's going to play 20 plus minutes a night, but he'll give you a good solid 15 plus minutes. And I think you can find a trade partner in that aspect. So it's not going to be a lot. You're going to probably get like a 5th round pick, maybe, if that. So, I mean, but yeah, that's going to be probably one of the players we're going to be watching when we talk about some of these moves. Because just to kind of go back to Rob Blake and his comments, he mentioned that they're not going to be able to bring back a lot of these same players that if he said, I don't know what the quote exactly was, but we won't be able to bring back, or if he could bring back the same roster, he could.
Yep.
But that's probably not going to be a possibility with the way the cap situation's panning out. So, yeah, you're looking at players probably like a Sean Walker, maybe a Carl Grunstrom who signed for $1 million next year, who could be on the way outs to make room for young players like Jordan Spence and Brant Clark, because you have to make room for at least one of those players. You can't have one of them starting off in the AHL next year, or both of them starting off in the AHL next year. Sorry. So yes, we're probably going to be looking at some of those moves. So I don't know if maybe that's kind of what you got out of Rob Blake and Walker, or
either they've had the conversation or Walker's just an astute guy that's like, listen, I'm not an idiot here. I see the writing on the wall. I was a 6-7 man all season. There's some absolute stud prospects coming up. I get it's a business. There's a cap. I make 2.6. Brant Clark doesn't. It's like,
exactly.
You know, I think I can get that. I do want to go back because I see a comment here from Real McCoy. I want to go back to the series briefly, Russ, because I meant to ask this and I didn't. So I'm glad I see the comment. There would be a different conversation if they didn't choke Game 4.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how you think about Game 4 in the series and how its effect on the series, or how does this land for you? Because I have an opinion on it. I don't know how it lands for you.
Yeah, it's weird because this was obviously talked about too in the exit interviews. And I guess just kind of listening to the players, I think that, I don't know, I don't feel like that was really the turning point. I mean, even Trevor Moore even mentioned it. They talked about like, they asked him that question, this exact question. Did you feel like you guys lost the series in Game 4? And he said no. Like they felt like they had put it in the back of their minds and they were ready to go in Game 5. And I mean, yeah, you can look at it and say like the Kings lost in that second period of that game, but I don't know. It's all hindsight, of course. I don't think it was. It just feels like maybe it just adds a little bit more to the disappointment when you look at the series in its entirety. But you can also look back at the last year. I mean, you have Game 6 and at home, you win that one, you win the series. And so I don't know, maybe it just adds a little bit more to the disappointment, more than that being like the problem for the series. But yeah, I could see how that could be an issue.
The only thing I don't like about the discourse around this Game 4 is that it like defined the series, and I really don't like that, because why couldn't Edmonton do the same thing about Game 1? Why couldn't Edmonton could just as easily do the same thing? They could have been up 3 games after 3 games. A. B. That means the series 2-2. You still got to go win games, and you could have just go out and win Game 5. Go out and win Game 6. They didn't, because guess what? Even if they did win Game 4, it's a 3-3 series going back to Edmonton if things plan out the way they did. So I just don't like it, and I would rather I think it's too easy to point at that and say, when Edmonton could have just as easily as pointed to the blown leads that they had earlier in the series, and they should have been up by bigger. So I don't know. I get the comment. I think it's a fair question. And you're not the only one suggesting that. It's just I don't really buy into that. I want to go real back. So you talk about Walker. And man, Russ, and I hate saying this, and I know you hate it, especially when I say this. I love Matt Roy. I just wonder, we talk about guys with term. We talk about needing to move money out.
Don't you do it.
If you're bringing Gavrikov, if they can come to an agreement with Gavrikov, hypothetically, that defensive defenseman, you have Jordan Spence right shot D. You have Brant Clark coming right shot D. Sean Durzi right shot D. Is Matt Roy expendable? If you're going to have, if I'm saying this, let me preface this. If the Kings are going to bring Gavrikov back, so you have Anderson, Gavrikov, 2 really defensive defensemen. I'm just asking a question, Nav. That's all I'm
They're
doing.
coming at you already.
I'm just asking the question. Do you see where I'm going with it, though?
No,
Like,
yeah,
I
it
don't
makes
know.
total sense. It makes total sense. I just, for me, I don't see Rob Blake as the type of general manager who'd be okay with having Jordan Spence and Brant Clark in the lineup at the same time. So I definitely see one spot in the defensive lineup that's open. So whether that's you send out Sean Walker, whether it's that you send out Sean Dursey, maybe both Sean's are shipped
Mm-hmm.
out.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tongue twister. Send out both, ship out. I can't even say it. But yeah, I don't know. It's Matt Roy's got to stay. He's
I'm a Matt Roy guy. I want to be clear. I want to be clear.
You're getting 18 minutes a night, 18, 22 minutes a night of solid defensive hockey, and even sprinkled in double digit goals this year. So I mean, for me, it's just you got to keep him. But yeah, I could see how that question comes up because you look at the way that salary cap situation's panning out for the Kings because they've quickly become a cap team. They're up there, and we'll probably do like a salary cap show because I think a lot of fans would be good for them to know because I mean you go on Cap Friendly and I love going on Cap Friendly. I don't know if you guys do as well.
Yeah.
You check out that armchair GM feature to kind of look into next year. And I mean, after you re-sign Gabe Velarde, who's probably going to get around $4, maybe even $5 million for maybe a couple years, there's not a lot of room unless you maybe find out a way to somehow miraculously move Cal Peterson's contract, which, as much as I hate it, sounds like he could be on the team next year. Yeah, this is more than likely going to be a situation where you see the same kind of lineup coming into next year.
Yeah, and again, I want to be clear. I'm a Matt Roy guy. I really, really like what he brings to this team. And I'm gonna go now and transition this into Todd McClellan because this is something to what he said was one of the things they look at is evaluating their style of play, their systems, their structures. Is the word that he used, whether power play, 5-on-5, penalty kill. And I wonder, this is again why I come back to Matt Roy. If they decide, man, Gavrikov was so good, we want to try to keep him around. How many guys, as we alluded to before, if Todd McClellan and his staff decide that in order for us to compete with these teams, to beat these better teams, we've got to do a better job managing the puck. We've got to do a better job moving the puck. We've got to do a better job at mobility and skating and out-skating these teams. In order to keep possession of the puck, we have to do a better job of that. If you have half of your decor, maybe more, guys that are not great at that, you better have the rest of them be really good at that. So if Anderson is going to be that, and he's paired with a Doughty, if Gavrikov is there, you might want a Jordan Spence or a Brant Clark. So you see where I'm going, and so that's the only. That's all I'm trying to say is if the goal becomes for the Kings to become more mobile, become more puck movers, to become a little bit more 2023, 2024 type of hockey, then you kind of have to, you can't have so many guys that are just so great in their own zone and just off the glass and out, off the glass and out. So that's where I'm coming at with this. So,
mundane hockey, right?
Which again, that's not the same. Obviously, Gavrikov and Roy was really effective together, but it has a ceiling, right? And if you want to beat these teams, you've got to be able to do both. So, anyways, back to McClellan. I thought one interesting quote that he had was in talking about the defensemen. I thought some had better series last year than they did this year. I do wonder who he was referring to there. I think
he mentioned the roster, the lineup in a whole. He mentioned forwards too, right?
I thought maybe he did. I thought he was referencing defensemen there, but maybe I misunderstood. I'll reference the defenseman. How about that? Maybe he was my thought would have been is Dursey was the obvious kind of choice there. I wonder if there was. I didn't hear the same love for Mikey Anderson in these playoffs. I don't know if you thought that or noticed that. What was your thought on Mikey Anderson's series? Because for as much love and praise as he got last season, it didn't quite seem to be the same this time around.
No, yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, you kind of look at the stats, and maybe he didn't have those eye-popping kind of tussles with McDavid and Drysdale or Nugent Hopkins that we had last year. But even the series in its entirety was really, I guess, quiet in terms of those extracurricular stuff that we
Mhm.
saw a lot last year. And it's weird because I wonder if maybe the teams maybe garnered a little bit more respect for each other. Maybe it was more about respect for each team's power play. They wanted to stay out of the
Yes.
box. That probably was more it. But yeah, so kind of looking at the defense, I thought Mikey Anderson, Drew Doughty, they had a tough series. I mean, it's you can say it is what it is. But and Sean Dursey, the reason I think he was a lot worse this series because he was whenever Jersey had the puck in the games I was watching, I just cringed because I felt like something bad was going to happen. And it's just you look back to last year in the last series where he actually was pretty good, pretty impactful. I think he had a little bit more mental freedom in terms of what he was able to do because there's no Doughty. There's no one else to turn to at that point. He was really the primary puck mover on the team. I mean, Jordan Spence had a couple games, but he was still rookie. He's brand new. I mean, even Sean Dursey was a rookie at that point, but he's a little older and he had gotten the minutes. But to go into this series, when you have Doughty back, Sean Dursey is probably stepping on the ice knowing that, okay, these are only the few shifts I'm going to have to make an impact. So maybe I'm going to grip my stick a little bit more, maybe try to overthink things a little bit too much. And that's kind of what we saw, I felt like, from Dursey, because there were times where he was just not himself. And maybe we saw a lot more of those Jersey turnovers that we were accustomed to a little bit too much in this playoff series against the Oilers.
Yeah, it was a tough spot, I think, for him too. And no, I mean no disrespect or offense to Alex Edler or anything like that. It was a tough pairing. The pairing is always
Yeah.
strong, even and then you put him against a team like Edmonton, and it's always going to be really tough. I see in the comments a couple of people talking about Drew Doughty's contract, and Drew Doughty had a very funny comment today about how we can get Vladislav Gavrikov signed. He said, give him $1 million. And that wouldn't be a bad idea because I'll be honest, I love Drew Doughty. He had a great Renaissance season this year, but boy, 4 more years at 11 million that's hefty.
Yep.
That is hefty. And, I want to go back real quick to my what seems like a blasphemous idea to trade Matt Roy. And part of the reason why I say that is like, listen, Rob Blake just traded Jonathan Quick, so you have a GM that is not afraid to do what he thinks is best for to help this team, which I think is a good thing. By the way, he's not apparently going to be married necessarily to guys just because of for the sake of sentimental value, which I think is a good thing. So I don't know. I guess we'll see how that goes. But very interesting though, off season upcoming, and you alluded to it before. Rob Blake made the comment. He was asked specifically about Cal Peterson if he sees him as an NHL goaltender, and he said, "I hope so." So
Yeah, he said we need Cal to be an NHL goalie. That's what we paid him for.
Well, which is true.
No, that's what you paid him for.
In his defense, that is exactly.
We didn't agree to this. You didn't ask us about our opinion on the matter. You gave him the $15 million. But yeah, that comment certainly opened a little bit of eyes to Kings fans, and even my eyes as well.
You know what it reminds me of? Because I think everybody last season, and we probably talked about it in the show too. I think a lot of people thought, I don't know if it was coming out of last season or for sometime in the summer, about, of course Sean Walker's not going to be around. They got Brant Clark who's going to come, Jordan Spence, of course. And he made a point, like, yeah, Sean Walker, he can play both sides. Like, he was very, like, he said it. He mentioned Sean Walker by name that he was going to be around. So it's like, don't not take Rob Blake if he says this guy's going to be here. Now, so Cal Peterson, I know everybody's already got him traded off the roster. That's way easier said than done. I don't think he's getting bought out. And I'm sure as hell don't think Rob Blake wants to send him and have that money eating up space in Ontario. So very interesting to see what happens with the goaltenders. But I wouldn't write Cal Peterson's contract off just yet, because it's going to take something healthy to do it. Second round pick, maybe more, good prospect. Who knows?
Probably a lot more, to be honest with you. I mean, you're talking about a goalie who couldn't make it in the NHL last year, was sent to the AHL and didn't put up good numbers in the AHL, and he has 2 more years tied at $5 million with a modified no trade clause. this is unfortunately, and as much as maybe Kings fans want to hate it, as much as I'm going to hate it, I'm going into next year thinking that Phoenix Copley and Cal Peterson are going to be the 2 goalies on the NHL roster. And you can't Rob Blake has dug himself too big of a hole to get out of at this point. It is what it is. I mean, you can't buy him out, because you buy him out, you're paying more next year than what you would be paying him if he was even on the roster. And then you save some money in the next couple of years. But I mean, the Kings need to find more money, not spend more money in terms of just paying for a player that's not even going to be on the roster. So you're not buying him out. You're not trading him away, because what team, I mean, unless Rob Blake just, I don't know, gets shovel day off drunk or something, and then they figure out a Connor Hellebuyck trade with involve Cal Peterson. So that's not happening, because you'd have to involve probably a player like Arthur Kaliev or even a first-round pick just to get rid of him. And so that's not happening. And so, yeah, that's like you mentioned, like Rob Blake, you have to take his comments like for what they are. He tells you straight up. And when he says Rob Blake, when he says that we need Cal Peterson to be an NHL goalie, all right, I'm expecting Cal Peterson to be on the NHL roster next year for the Kings, which hopefully he can hang out with Bill Ranford every day and figure out what's going on with that, because we need him to be a lot better than what he was this year.
He told us they were going to play with a right shot D on the left side last year. He said it, and it came true. The one team that I is a potential landing spot for Cal Peterson is, and I don't know enough about if they're going to have issues reaching cap floors and all that stuff. I haven't dug as deep into their roster, but what I do know is they have one goalie under contract coming back next season. And that's the Chicago Blackhawks, a team that has no problem losing right now, clearly in a rebuild. So the idea for them to have a goalie at 2 years at $5 million, maybe not the worst thing for them. If it just helps them money wise, it gets them a shot at it throws a dart at a. He's not that young anymore either, young-ish.
Is there another Connor Bedard coming next year?
Goalie, right? So like I don't know, but when I look at around the league, there's not that many teams that everybody's cap strapped.
Oh,
so
man.
there's not that many teams. Yeah, there's not that many teams that have the cap space to spend, and oh, by the way, are going to be willing to take on Cal Peterson and play him. So it's. But I do think Chicago, of the team, Chicago could be, because there's going to be some teams that were bad this year that they're going to look to take a step, but that's not Chicago. They're in this, I think, for a little bit of a rebuild. So I'll be interested to see what happens there. And I guess if we could touch on maybe one other guy here, Russ, unless there's something else you want to get to, by all means. But Carter Scores mentions Arthur Kaliev in a comment here. Wouldn't lose sleep if Kaliev was traded, to be honest. And I know, he was somebody that Todd McClellan talked about in today's exit interview. Kind of what was your take on, McClellan's talking about Arthur Kaliev, and maybe your opinion of Arthur Kaliev and where he fits right now on this team?
Yeah, it's weird, because I'm a huge Artie guy. I mean, you kind of following, just even looking back to last summer when he came to development camp and really kind of proved himself as being like a really solid prospect for the Kings, and was almost a leader at that dev camp. And even throughout the year, I mean, you look back at the beginning of the season, he was scoring. I think he had a few goals. He was leading the team in points and goals per 60 on the power play. So, yeah, he was one of the better players for the Kings at the start of the year. And it just sucks because he's just dropped off so much. Hey, what's up, Brandon?
What's going on, fellas?
Because we're talking about Kaliev right now and his little fall from grace. He dropped off just so much after he came back from injury, and he just never found his game again. And I don't know, like you've kind of opened my eyes a little bit, Joe, talking about Kaliev and the type of player that he is. And you look at the Kings prospect pool. I mean, Martin Chromiak's there, Sammy Fagimo's there, Alex Laferriere. I can go on and on. Francesco Pinelli. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good young forwards still coming up in the ranks. So, I mean, Arthur Kaliev, I mean, his shot is what it is. I mean, you kind of Google his name, or even just on Twitter, you search for his name. GMs are just going to pop up with highlights of his wicked wrist shots. So maybe that's a prospect that the Kings can tie to a trade. Maybe bring in a defenseman to kind of help him out a little bit, because it could be a very valuable piece in a trade. A player of his caliber who maybe has that scoring pedigree that a lot of teams are looking for.
Yeah, I mean, he's not a play driving winger. I love his shot. I love his ability, but we're so fine. He's a very young player, so I don't want to get too crazy here. There's a reason why, he's working on earning McClellan's trust, because, but it's not hard to see when, okay, yeah, he's done. Like we talked about that game after Edmonton, like there was no shot he was coming back. So I don't know. He is a player that just they have so many, but I say he's a trade asset, but he's making $870,000. You kind of need that guy on the roster. You need those guys that are making, league minimum basically to be important players to fill out your roster, because you can't, if they have to move forwards out, guys that make in that $4 million range to open up some space for something else, you need Arthur Kaliev, and you need him to do well. And I said he was the last player, and Randon, I'll let you chime in, but I wanted to throw a shout at Gabe Vilardi. I love this guy's exit interview. I mean, I don't know if you watched it, Randon, if you had a chance, but I mean, it was they asked him about trust, and it seemed like Todd McClellan started to trust him more, and he basically said, well, you play better, and you earn his trust. Like, it wasn't that crazy. He talked so much about his consistency, and that's his goal here, is to be more consistent. And I love that he was very honest. They asked him about, like, what do you got to work on? He's like, watching guys like McDavid and Draisaitl just own the corners, own the puck possession. He's like, that looks like something I want to do. So yeah, puck possession, board play. Just thought it was a really kind of a refreshing type of an exit interview from Gabe Vilardi. So, Randy, what do you think? And touch on Kaliev too while you're at it.
Yeah. So for the Vilardi thing, like the exit interview was vastly different than a couple of years ago. If you remember when they asked him about the face-offs, he was very dismissive about him owning up to that part of the game, practicing, those types of things. And the answer that he gave, like, I don't know, it's like stirred a lot of fans, including myself, the wrong way. Like, you're a professional athlete and you don't really care about what you're working on or not working on, or, it's an adequate question. Your play is not up to par. There's room for you to improve. Like, and you're not taking, it doesn't seem like you're taking this seriously, where, this is a complete 180. He said, this, I had a good season. I earned trust by playing better. These are places where I've identified that I want to work on this whole off season. It's a completely different answer than what we got before. And it probably just comes with maturity. It probably comes with a bigger role, more trust, more stuff being earned. And, it's tough for a lot of these guys. I would assume every single one of these guys is the best player on their team growing up. Right. So, and then you collectively get in better groups. So there probably wasn't a whole lot Vilardi had to work on in his game until he was about 17 or 18 years old. He was probably just naturally better than everybody else. Not saying that he didn't work hard, but he just physically gifted. And so now when you are amongst everybody else on your team who also was the best player on their team, playing against other guys that are also the best player on their team, and then you really see the best of the best rise to the top, especially in two series against two of the top 10 best players in the world. It kind of puts things in perspective, and I'm glad that he's kind of taken it with stride there.
Yeah, Vilardi, it's weird because with Vilardi, the last, like, maybe during the COVID years, it felt like mentally he wasn't all there. And I don't know what was going on with it. We never really got into it. But even when he talks to the media and stuff, he just didn't really seem too outspoken, maybe too conversational when talking with some of the reporters. But even the last couple of times we've talked to him, he just seems like he's opened up more. Even in his exit interview, like you talked about, he made the little joke with Sean Walker about how since Walker's not going, he's not going to go to the World Championship. So that was kind of funny. But yeah, I think it's just also a confidence thing, and that move to the wing, it really helped him out like a ton. So I don't know. I feel like that's probably the position we're probably going to be seeing Gabe Vilardi at. in his time with the Kings, because you kind of look at the Kings lineup going forward. You have Kopitar, you have Deneau, Byfield should be that center. Obviously Lizotte. So I wouldn't be surprised if Velarde just stays on the wing next year and should be good. And then Rob Blake also mentioned, kind of made a little hint to Velarde's contract situation, and something I've mentioned too. He had talked about when asked about Velarde's contract situation, he brought up the CBA and about how that kind of brings it down a little bit in terms of long-term deals. So for me, that just opened my eyes. Like, okay, this is going to be a bridge deal, because you sign him for 2 years, you keep his restricted free agent tag to him. So then you still have team control over him. Whereas if you sign him to like a 4 or 5 year deal, then he becomes a UFA at like 28, 29 years old. And then he pretty much can get as much money as he wants. So send him to a bridge deal, whether that's $4 or $5 million or so. I think that's a great move for the Kings. And then you can kind of revisit it when he becomes an RFA again.
Yeah, fine line, I think, though, because we see guys, if he's going to be a player that's going to keep producing at this rate, we talked about with Kempe, lock in those UFA years, because if he's going to keep developing, he's going to be an $8-9 million player. The risk here with Velarde is he's had some health concerns, so I can understand if they do opt to go the bridge route, but it's one of those things where you go the bridge route, and then you take him into eventually to a UFA, you're going to be looking at somebody that's going to command a lot more, when maybe you could have locked him up for more years at a little bit less earlier. But that's always tough, especially with a guy with his injury history.
I wish they would have done that with Kempe. Remember, we were saying that was a 6-year deal. Like they only signed him to 4.
Yep.
I mean, it's in a double-edged sword too, because you're looking at the paying somebody after 1 year has worked. What I would say probably 50% of the time. Like Cal obviously didn't work out.
Yeah.
Trevor Moore so far this year, as far as from a point standpoint, didn't produce what he did last season. You could argue that he wouldn't be a second liner on most teams in the league. So then you have Kempe that's just working out. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. You can't keep doing this to every single player, because then you might have too many bad contracts. And so maybe the wait and see approach. With all the young forwards that we have coming up, maybe the wait and see approach is the right approach, to see if Velarde can do it in 3 straight seasons. And then you probably won't mind paying him $8 or $9 million at that point.
Yeah, we're seeing teams like just delve into these long-term deals with their young stars, and it'll be something to watch. I mean, especially for Byfield next year, right? I mean, we talked about him a little bit after seeing Tim Stützle's deal, Dylan Cousins' deal, Matt Boldy got a deal. Quentin Byfield's got 1 more year left on his entry-level contract. So if we're hoping for him to produce that, what we all expect him to, whether that's 40, 50-plus points next year, we'll have to see what Rob Blake wants to do in terms of that contract, because that's going to be an interesting one. Whether maybe you just dive right into giving him that 8-year deal at like $3, $4, $5 million. I don't know, just depending on his production, of course. But that'll be one of the young players that the Kings will have to watch in terms of signing in the long term.
I mean, it would have to be a competitive contract for him to sign that. I don't think Byfield would sign an 8-year by $3 million, considering if he believes himself to be a number 1 seed eventually in this league, right?
You have to produce for sure, though.
As far as Kaliev is concerned, I think Todd McLellan wants you to earn trust on 5-on-5 to be rewarded on the power play. And where Kaliev needs to be is he needs to be put on the power play regardless, because that's his number 1 asset. And so his play and what would benefit the team counteracts the way Todd McLellan views trust and earning time on ice. It has to be done 5-on-5 to earn other things, and I think that you could still have him be a productive player. And he was a productive player, being a 4th and 3rd line guy and being put on the power play earlier in the year. He had the most power play goals on our team, playing, the final 30 seconds of a power play. So the question is, will T-Mac allow him to make these mistakes here and there, to earn that or have that power play production? Or is he just going to be like, hey, I'll take a guy with less of a shot that has a more complete game? Because to be honest with you, I mean, I know you guys already talked about the game, but the 11-on-7 was the kryptonite for us. Like they just kept pounding in that fourth line. That's not going to happen all the time. And I think there's maybe one team or maybe two teams in this league that could deploy that strategy on a consistent basis. But, just last year we were talking about how Kaliev's defensive metrics for time on ice were one of the top forwards in the league. So like what happened? What happened was the difference. So was it the injury? Did he not fully heal? Is it a confidence thing? Being time off ice? Because people stepped up. Second half of the season, Kupari stepped up. Lazat got moved up to the third line. So, as Velarde said, it's earned in this league. And so when you come back from injury, you're giving your spot back if you're a first or second line player. I mean, but that's not the case for bottom six guys or bottom pair guys, right? They don't care. Where the team's playing better, the team's playing worse, you still have to earn that spot back, and he wasn't able to. So we'll see. I mean, I think it's going to be a thing for him. If I were to give him one thing, is going to be just being more defensively sound and not being a liability on the fourth line in order to be able to shine on the power play.
I mean, that's the Gabe Velarde strategy. Is he talks about it I think it was last year or a year before that, is that his defensive game is what he needs to work on the most, and the offense will come. And sure enough, that's what we saw this year. Velarde, I've heard people talking about Selke with Velarde. I know it's not going to happen, but the way you kind of look at his metrics, like, yeah, he should be maybe in that conversation. So yeah, that's the thing with Kaliev, is he definitely needs to work on his defensive game, his neutral zone game, because when he's in the offensive zone, he finds that shooting opportunity. Yeah, he's great. He's got probably one of the best shots on the team, but that defensive game is such a problem for him. And there's also an issue for him too, is that a player of his caliber, he's just blocked. I mean, he should probably be getting top 6 minutes. And like, if he were playing on the Ducks last year, he'd probably have like 15, 20 goals, just because he's playing on a crappy team that is all offense. And he'd probably be getting top 6 minutes, because that's kind of what they deploy. But for the Kings, or a team that's wanting to win, and you have all these good players that are probably blocking him, especially ones that have come in the last few years, he's not afforded that opportunity. So maybe that is what's kind of hurting him a little bit.
Well, and not only that, but look at how the Kings kind of play their game, and we've talked about a lot, where they're not a kind of move up and out of their zone kind of methodically. They create chances a lot of times off the rush. And when you have wingers like Trevor Moore and Victor Arvidsson and Adrian Kempe, Quentin Byfield played a lot of the wing. It's not hard to see why they're a team that creates chances off the rush with guys that can skate like that. It's not really Arthur Kaliev. I mean, Arthur Kaliev isn't going to burn down one of the wings and beat you with a snapper. Like, he can beat you with the snapper, but he's got to be set up shop in the zone. So it is a little bit of a different situation for Kaliev, because under the way the Kings play, which is a little bit more, again, their D-men are going to get it out into the neutral zone, let their forwards skate into it. It's tougher for Kaliev. So I do think that's a little bit of a challenge stylistically too, perhaps, which is why you see him being much more effective on the power play, not only because of his shot, but just because of the style of player that he is. Perhaps it is a little bit of a difficult fit for the Los Angeles Kings, at least in how they're, currently set up and currently playing.
Yeah, I want to just kind of wrap up with Kaliev. I want to dive into a couple more players, or a couple more things that were mentioned at the exit interview. Rob Blake, he was asked about Alex Turcotte. I thought he gave a pretty coy answer in terms of what he was looking for or what he wants to see from Turcotte, and just pretty much said health.
Yep.
Just be healthy. So that's going to be another player we're going to have to watch this summer and see how he kind of develops. I wonder if he'll be at Dev Camp in July. I would expect him to be, because he kind of missed pretty much all those summer activities last year because of his concussion. So I would expect him to be at Dev Camp, and hopefully he can kind of contribute and show some development. At this point, fans are almost kind of forgotten about Turcotte, but I'm not going to write him off yet. We'll see what happens this year. And then who else were we talking about? Yeah, Sean Walker and Gabe Velarde, they're not going to go to World Championships again. Trevor Moore is not going. Matt Roy is not going. So I think Kupari and Grunstrom, they were asked, and they said they'd be welcome to it if they were interested. And I believe it's in Finland. So Kupari could be an interesting name to watch. I think I'd love to see Kupari go into the World Championships. I think that would help his game tremendously. And Gabe Velarde went last year and maybe that was part of the reason maybe he started to have a little bit of a breakout. So I don't know. That could be something to watch for in the summer. I don't know if you guys saw or heard anything else at the exit interview you guys want to bring up.
Not me. I mean, I think this is an interesting question, and this might be a full episode right here. DB comes in, guys. When you talk about development, is there a single player that we've drafted in the last 3 or 4 seasons that have equaled or risen to above expectations? Serious question. And you're looking at just the different philosophies with what the team is trying to do, right? You mentioned the Ducks earlier, Joe. They're letting their prospects find their way, whether good or bad. They're not caring about points or wins. They're just letting them develop on their own terms. Well, Kings aren't doing that. The Kings are making you earn it. They're bringing in veterans. They're clogging up roster spots because they're trying to win now because of what Victor Arvidsson and Philip Deneau helped this team. But I could also say that you're looking at, Velarde has equaled expectations of a first-round pick. There's a lot of first-round picks that don't even make a roster, right? Or don't play over 200 games. I think 20% of first-round picks don't even play 200 games in the league. So he's definitely equal to what, he's a first-line player, second-line player, third-line player, first power play. That's what we thought Velarde would be. And now, obviously, that's one season. But you look at also players that were traded away for different trades. Brock Faber, starting for the Minnesota Wild. I believe he was second line on the right side. And his development was based off of the Kings and what he did at Minnesota, and he's contributing to another team, but that was because of the strength and development coach and game plan that was executed by the Kings until this last season. So I think there's quite a few players that come in. I just don't think that we have seen a high echelon peak of any one of our prospects, and that's what people are concerned with. We haven't seen the Cale Makars or players like that drafted in the top 5 really be a top 5 player. And I think that's hindered a lot by Alex Turcotte. But, Byfield's taken the slow burn approach. Maybe it's because of injury. Maybe it's because he won't reach what we thought he would be at 2. But, we still have one of our major players coming in. I don't think you can really dictate this until, 2 or 3 more seasons down the line. I mean, Byfield will be 23 in 3 years, right? And he'll still be starting to come into his prime. Brant Clark will be 21. Alex Turcotte hopefully can be healthy. And so there's a lot of players. I mean, you're looking at Francisco Pinelli had over 50 goals in the Ontario Hockey League. And so there's a lot of guys that, could have their shots, but realistically, we might like everybody's games that we've drafted, but over half these players won't play serious minutes for the Kings. It just is what it is. And so where does that come in development? Is it the philosophy? It's not the development staff, because I remember there was an article, I think 3 years ago on The Athletic, where the LA Kings have more minutes played than almost any other team from draft picks. So we just don't have that high-end, elite talent being drafted since Kopitar and Doughty. So, where do you guys kind of feel about this?
It's a really, really good question. And really, I go back and forth on this because their misses right now have been at the top. Alluding to your piece there about a lot of players playing NHL minutes. I mean, that does speak. Does that speak? This is where it comes into, is it the scouting and the drafting, or is it the development? Because those are generally 2 different kind of things. So the scouts and the draft has found some gems in the mid to later rounds. The misses. So is that a credit to the scouting staff and the development staff? Because the development staff has developed them into enough players to get NHL minutes. Why are they missing on the top picks? And it is a little early, obviously, with Byfield, so I don't want to go too crazy here. It's just that, you're seeing some other players make significant impacts at his age and his experience. Obviously,
but to your point, but you're getting vast value out of Matt Roy, a 7th-round pick. You're getting vast value out of Mikey Anderson, right? So there are players that you are greatly exceeding their value at that point.
This is really, really difficult and if I'm being honest, for any of us to answer, because we're not there from a developmental standpoint. We're not in these meetings. We're not doing those things. So were these players always destined to be? And the scouts found these diamonds in the roughs, and they were always going to be these players. Or were they crapshoots and they were developed into them by the development team? maybe it's a little bit of both. This is what makes it really tough, and I don't feel comfortable sitting here making any sort of like declaration because boy, that's just a tough thing to do, and especially when you look at the top of the draft, they've had a lot of bad luck when it comes to injury. Alex Turcotte can't even stay on the ice. Like, how can you? We can't evaluate the guy. He's not on the ice. Byfield, we talked about it earlier, Rand, and he said it in his exit interview. He broke his freaking ankle. Then he comes back. He's sick. He's healthy. He's sick. Loses 25 pounds. Then comes back. He's had to deal with some early adversity here. So, are they misses? Maybe, but are they misses because let's also consider everybody had Byfield and Turcotte going in the top where they did. Right? I mean, maybe you could make the case Byfield or Stützle, or maybe it was Turcotte or somebody else, but like they were all generally right there. So were the Kings scouts wrong? If the scouts wrong, the NHL scouting community was wrong. Or are they not developing? And why are they not developing? Are they not developing because of the development staff, or are they not developing because of injury, illness? There's so many factors here where it's a great question. I love the discussion. Really tough to like pinpoint and hammer down, especially from where we're sitting.
It's hard to evaluate right now. And the two glaring prospects that everybody's talking about and why this conversation comes up is Alex Turcotte and Quinton Byfield. And like you just said, Joe, those were two players everybody had going where they were drafted. No, this wasn't a reach by the Kings at any point. So yeah, you can be upset with and kind of look back at it like, yeah, I am upset. Like I hate watching Matt Boldy or Dylan Cousins or Moritz Seider do all these crazy things from 2019 draft, or even Tim Stützle. But I'm going to end this conversation with one thing. Point out one thing here. Quinton Byfield had 4 points in the playoff series? It was a minus 5. Had 4 points in the playoff series. The New York Rangers just played 7 games. You know how many points Alex Lafreniere had? 0 points from Alex Lafreniere, who was the consensus number 1 overall pick in the 2020 draft. You think they're having that same conversation? Probably. Yep. I don't think anybody. I don't know if any Kings fan would trade Quinton Byfield to Alex Lafreniere. I wouldn't. No way. Yep. So it's just it's an early conversation to have at this point.
The other part to remember, they're kids. Let's be honest. I mean, and I know it's a young man's league these days. I know the league is getting younger and younger, and I can appreciate that. But man, you're talking about 19, 20, 21-year-old kids that it's difficult. It's difficult.
Quinton Byfield's played 99 NHL games. We're not going to write him off yet. We can relax here on that.
It's just an interesting philosophy, because then you have team philosophy, you have strength and conditioning. You know, do you let these guys play? Do they have to earn it? Is it a combination of both? You know, and all those come into play when you're talking about a prospect development. But there's some times where players force themselves in. Lizotte, not a juggernaut. When he's forced himself into the lineup, he forced himself into a second contract by his play on the ice. And so sometimes you can only control what you can control at some point in time, but eventually the control always comes back to the player and how well they do on the sheet. And, you know, that's where it comes from. You know, he can't affect him breaking an ankle or the COVID thing or getting sick, but you know, he'll have all offseason to prepare and get stronger and get bigger. You'll have, you know, the same thing for every single one of these players. It's going to be interesting to see what Brandt Clark takes from playing in the OHL, and will he be ready to potentially take the number 2 spot on that right side over Matt Roy, or will he be on the third pair and have to earn it? All that's going to be up to the prospects at that point.
Yeah. I'm really excited to see what, because I would expect Alex Turcotte to go to Dev Camp. So, and obviously some of the other players like Laferriere, Pinelli, Chromiak. I mean, there's still a ton of young quality prospects for the Kings. I mean, the Ontario Reign are going to be stacked next year. I mean, think about it, just like the players I just mentioned with Laferriere and Chromiak and Pinelli and whether it's Clark still there. I mean, there's a lot of great young talent that's still in the Kings this year, and it doesn't sound like there's very many.
Portillo, we're gonna have a see.
Yeah,
Portillo in that.
There's going to be there too. So I mean, there's a lot of good young talent that's still young. Doesn't sound like there's very many injuries that a lot of these players are going to have to deal with over the summer, which is going to be good. And then not to mention with some of the other
just be a
draft picks,
Keel, right?
And then Akil, yeah, and Akil it seems like he's going to be coming back. So that's another player that we haven't even mentioned. So I don't know. It's a tough. I understand the question about the development for some of these Kings players, but it's just I feel like it's still too early to talk about, especially with what we're seeing from Kempe and Velarde.
Well,
so
and what's
you
tough,
got to consider that too.
What's tough is the Kings, and I think I go back to something that I've had this kind of thought and opinion for a while now. They're trying to do both things at once. They're trying to compete yet develop, and that is really tough to do because I know people want to talk about how they blew it up, and they sort of blew it up. I mean, they could have went nuclear, right, and dealt some bigger guys like a Kopitar or somebody like that. I'm not saying that they should have. I'm just saying like there was other pieces that could have been moved out.
They had a transfer trade I followed a couple years ago. Remember that?
Yeah. So what they're trying to do is have these young guys come up, and they've added Deneau, they've added Arvidsson, they've added Fiala, which have been great adds across the board. I mean, no, he didn't miss on any of those right now, has Rob Blake. But then you're asking, like, in playoff games, in playoff series against guys like Edmonton, teams like Edmonton, you're asking a lot of these bottom six guys that are Grundstrom, Kupari, Byfield got moved down there. Velarde, he had a great season, but you're asking him now, and it's like, at some point, Kaliev, who started the series and then ended up not finishing it. It's like you don't want to block them, you don't want to not let these guys play, but at the same time, clearly, especially in the bottom six of the roster, it was not good enough. So, do you bring in that veteran forward to play those minutes? And now Rasmus Kupari sitting in the press box watching the game. Is that so? It's a tough. There was a lot of questions in the exit interviews about Stanley Cup window. Is this team in a championship window? It's tough. It's kind of a tough question, anyways. I don't know. It's probably not a real answer to that, but the window is as long as Andrei Kopitar is playing at this level. That's your window, and whether that's one more year or 2 more years, because if you don't replace that, there is no window. It's over. Okay. Like, you're not going to win a cup without a number one center. And right now, the Kings don't have an Andrei Kopitar replacement. That's okay, because he's still here and he's still playing really, really well. The idea of it being Byfield, this is where it gets tricky. You're trying to develop the player, but because you need him to develop, because you need him to eventually step into a big role, but he's not quite there yet. But you don't want to block him because you need him. So it's a balancing act that they're trying to, and it's worked enough to where they've made playoffs back-to-back years, Game 7, Game 6, the 104 points this season, all that stuff. So obviously it's trending in a good direction. But as far as a window is concerned, the window is as long as Andrei Kopitar is doing this, because I don't know who you replace him with at this moment. So I don't.
I mean, they felt like there wasn't a number 2 center after Velarde kind of fluttered there, and if Byfield doesn't transition to that number 1 center role, I could see them going out and getting somebody, i.e. Austin Matthews or whatever, right? So
you're right, but it is tough to go trade for a 1C. That's tough to do. The only players off the top of my head, that's why I was so big on Eichel, by the way, if you guys recall. I was
too.
And you didn't need Byfield to do it because you had it right there. So, but anyways, he's gone. The players right now that fit the bill is Austin Matthews. I'm still a big believer in Pierre-Luc Dubois, but there's a lot of questions around where he's going to go anyway. So, but it's tough. What number 1 centers become available? Almost never. Look at Mika Zibanejad and the Rangers. They traded in with Derek Brassard. So they recognized Zibanejad before he popped off. So they caught a break. I mean, they scouts did their job, but it's really difficult if you don't have it to just go acquire a number 1 center. It's not easy to do.
Even just a top player in general. I mean, the Panthers figured it out. They traded a 40-point scorer for Matthew Tkachuk
because the wingers are easier. Kevin Fiala, the Kings got Kevin Fiala. Victor Arvidsson isn't quite to that level, but they got a really good second line center in Kevin Fiala because tough decisions have to be made, especially with the cap. So I do think you can acquire even high level wingers more easily than you can an impactful play driving 200-foot center.
Very much so. Well, that's we have plenty to discuss this offseason. Thank you guys for coming in. Way to hold it down, boys, while I was slinging some metal, selling a car. Appreciate that. Appreciate you guys all in the chat. You guys were holding it down. I was kind of looking at the chat while I was waiting for the deal to get done. So tough end of the year, but we're going to come back. This team is on the rise. Check out all of our articles at hockeyroyalty.com. Follow us on Twitter at all the Twitter handles scrolling across the bottom at NHL Russell, at hockey_royalty, at JW Paterino, at Random Commander 24. And if you want the rain news, at Kopitar for HOF. Appreciate everybody here. And, we got plenty of content coming up. It won't be as fast and as furious as 3 or 4 episodes a week, but it'll be there for you guys. We'll get some draft content coming in as well, and perhaps just kind of talking about the Stanley Cup playoffs. Keep your ear to the ground and your eyes on Twitter, and the content will be there. And as always, on this podcast, go Kings, go.